I expect that I will have trouble convincing you of the mistake of paternalism, especially if you've come to hold this view, which is so common. In fact, you may be thinking, how could it possibly be a mistake if you are literally a father with children who are put in your care, whom you are required to lead? The same applies to mothers, two authority figures. How could there be any trouble in this basic necessity? The burden is still on me to expose this mistake. I'm saying that the mistake is to move quickly with the speed of lightning from the recognition of the necessity of leading people who are in your care, you as a parent say, to fitness to lead. The question that we are examining is indeed what fits us to lead others. But the strange thing is that this is rarely part of the discussion. The answer that I'm suggesting is the renunciation of leadership in favor of following. We forget the preeminence and untransformability of following in God's order. The following remains following. We tend to presume that in the background of our moves of leadership, even as parents, we are taking direction from God. But that this is a presumption is an outrageous thing. This is oddly difficult to show to some people, but I'm nevertheless going to try it by saying just one thing, and briefly. The trouble I am indicating is the fearlessness of this confidence. Consider the following statement by Augustine on exactly this point. In a sermon that Augustine gave on the anniversary of his ordination, when he became the leader of his flock, addressing that flock, he said, "What I am for you, a leader, terrifies me. What I am with you consoles me. For you, I am a bishop. But with you, I am a Christian. The former is a danger, the latter, salvation." What is he saying? Well, here is one reading, but ask yourself if you accept it. Some, thinking of Christians in the way they do, will hear him as saying this: if it were just me relying on my own judgment, I would be in danger as a leader, in danger of leading you astray. That betrayal I mentioned. But I have our community, your correction, should I get out of line. We are Christians together, saved by Christ. With you, I won't go wrong, because we are all saved, graced with the Spirit of God. This reading incorporates the paternalist mindset, which is that we, Christians together, are blessed with judgment. By virtue of what? God has blessed us. But this is the we special people Pharisaic mindset that Jesus says was getting God's children lost. Judaism saves. Can we not replace that with Christianity saves? Does this not give us the same deadly error? Augustine was not saying that because we are Christians together, by some definition that needs no detail, we won't go wrong. The exact reading that lines up with the presumption of paternalism. Christianity, for Augustine, is not a society of good judgment, a wealth of sound guidance, you may presume, if you are looking at a person who has Christian beliefs. Christianity is not a tradition of wisdom, which you may tap into by going to a school run by self-identified Christians. Christianity is being saved by God if we are following. Everything is in following, in the intimate and close connection that the follower has with the leader, by following the guidance of the shepherd, not Christians, by heeding the guidance set out for Christians in their own holy book, the lost sheep find the path of life. Just think for a minute about the guidance of Christians. For example, consider the online Christian community. None of these people are people I know. I don't know what they believe or how they live. I'm simply told that they're Christian. You listen and find they share some of your views. This person is offering guidance in how to think about something. Is it good guidance? How would we know? Shall we presume that because they are Christian, by some unspoken definition, the heart of paternalism, that they are taking direction from God, they are vehicles of divine direction? What indicates to you that they are reliable? For example, how often in these sorts of discussion, in podcasts, blog posts, is anything ever carefully rested on the foundation of the words of God, the teachings of Jesus? Think of the care with which you have to set a moved house onto the foundation that will support it. Faith is symbolized in the Bible not by the Greek metaphor of illumination, but by the image of the rock. The authority of the tradition illuminated with the truth, the authority of the believer, all that is contrary to the character of Christianity. Jesus' image of the rock puts into the picture a relation, the rock and the thing that the rock supports, which is manifestly on it. The image of the sheep behind the shepherd is the same kind of image. Back now to Augustine. The salvation that he mentions is the reliance of that whole community upon its actual leader, the image given by Jesus that I just mentioned. These people are saved not in becoming a member of the Christian club, the leader class, but by following the Lord. Augustine's flock could indeed guide him, as he appears to suggest, but in one way only. Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this breach of faith that you have committed against the God of Israel in turning away this day from following the Lord by building yourselves an altar? The Lord has commanded particular things, and in this verse from Joshua, the issue is altars, but another time it was marriage. There are countless other matters that will concern us and that we have been instructed about. The issue is remaining on this path, staying on his foundation. What shows us that path is not what Christians have to say, but what Christians have to say that is set on the foundation of the guidance we were already given, as we see here in Joshua. Following, that is the key. You cannot presume that any bunch of people here or online has this groundedness. You have to hear them repeat the divine guidance or argue from it as a premise. The mistake of paternalism is the real presumption, which replaces careful and fearful checking that your paternal moves are indeed moves of following. Your willingness to be corrected is a sign of that fear, fear being so important. When Augustine talks about terror, he means that it is terrifying to be a leader because the man in this role is, there's no way around this, the one who decides. It's not God who decides. Believe it or not, you fool, you can practically hear Augustine saying this. It is a man who rules. What is to be dreaded in this office, he says, and note this, is that this pleasure, the pleasure of being the great man, God's anointed leader, what is to be dreaded is that this pleasure would start generating its own fruit, wild grapes, not the fruit that Jesus called us to bear. Augustine is saying that a Christian leader, politician, teacher, parent, must have fear. Fearlessness is insane. The presumption of fidelity that begins to spread among people, vaulted into positions of authority, he says, is profoundly dangerous. The defect, the deficiency, the thing missing is this. In the paternalistic view of both culture and education, The fathers are the teachers and also the lawmakers, the definers of our institutions, schools, marriage, the law, etc. But a Christian society already has a father. And in a Christian society, all the focus must be on the leader, who is none of us. We are not leaders. All the attention must be on the difference between the leader and, by contrast, the follower, the sheep. The one is exalted and pure. The other is, as often as not, more often than not, a letdown, a creature smitten with his own Pharisaic superiority to the lost. You can work out the norms that your society will uphold as norms, as you must do, starting from either side of that coin, man or God, it does not matter. But if you hold this second conception, you are starting not with a role-informed leader, but with a duality, God and man. You can begin with either one, the character of man, human needs, human accomplishments, traditions, but you will not be able to understand these traditions and needs, assess these things, until you turn the coin over and consider the character of God, what God has done, what work he is doing, and to what end, what God desires, what plan he has announced. And at this point, you must turn, and turn rather pathetically, back to man, back to every human leader, even every great leader in the great 2,000-year chronicle of the Bible. And what do the facts of history tell us then? God does things, man does things. Does man do what God desires? You cannot have a system of education that takes direction from the character of man, presumed to have absorbed the Father into himself. You cannot risk that. You must have a conception of education that takes direction from the character of God. You cannot have a culture that takes direction from the Western tradition, from a shift back to natural law, to virtue ethics, to the great books, because all of these things, every last one of them, is susceptible to the undermining that Augustine pointed out. They can all be used to produce rotten fruit. The way you select the virtuous action may begin to come from an ungrounded part of your culture, may begin to come out of you as a standard and not from the actual leader you claim to be following. Consider our subject, Christian education. Is a person enabled by his or her knowledge of virtue ethics to identify the right thing to do or to say, the thing that is neither too cowardly nor too rash, etc.? Can you find the virtuous act in this situation? Is our approach to this to think, well, everybody's just doing their best? Our best is not the measure that was given to us, called to participate with God in acts suited to his kingdom. The blessing you see here is not the imparting of knowledge. You must have a conception of education that takes direction from the character of God, because that is what Christianity is. Danielou remarks that civilization's most reliable ally is Christianity, but the essential purpose of Christianity is something entirely different from the purpose of civilization. The kingdom of God is not the best civilization. It is not a construct, but a relation, a father and child in which the two are united by love. The kingdom of God is a home in which the supremacy of what is supreme is honored. Do we know the divine will? The Christian who thinks himself leadership material believes that he does. The factor in his conclusion is the thought, which is not really false, that compared to the average member of this benighted society, yes, I know the will of God. That this is true is what makes it so dangerous. But a person knows the divine will only to the extent that he or she has steeped himself or herself in its shape and character. And that is the substance of a Christian education. That is the knowledge that defines Christian education. Romans 12:2 is one of the New Testament verses most often cited to explain the purpose of Christian education. I'm sure you heard it used at this college. Do not be conformed to this world. Here the Apostle Paul tells us what to avoid. And now the question is, how? He does not say education, but a word he uses hints at it. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And here the citation usually ends, as if we have been given the answer. How is the mind renewed? According to the usual understanding of Christian education, by giving the student the intellectual content of that Christian civilization, the traditions of thought, the ideas and concepts, the virtues, natural law, training in logic. Isn't the idea giving the mind what the mind ought to contain? But the Apostle Paul has not finished his sentence. He has just mentioned the mind, and in the ancient world, what the mind accomplished was knowing. I say knowing, not knowledge. Naming an act, not a content. In the Western civilization that we have been discussing, it was knowledge, a content that could be had like a kind of riches. Mind expansion through knowledge of the Western tradition is futile. And I believe this is what the Apostle Paul is about to tell us in the way he completes his sentence, which is that by testing, you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. This is the objective. To be conformed to this world is to have another objective and not discern this. Perform the testing that reveals this. Note the presence of that word, testing. If we do not test, we will come up with what we think is good and warranted, when our objective was, what is good and acceptable and perfect? We may wish to read Paul as saying that the ideas of Christian civilization are what allow us to discern what is the will of God and put that knowledge in our pocket. But is Paul not instead telling us that everything that comes into our minds must be tested somehow to see whether it does come from God? When he adds the word perfect, you can be sure that his issue is this idea or proposal coming from God? Does it show his handiwork, as in Psalm 19? You begin to see the issue here, I hope, man's way and God's way as two different ways. In the time of the prophets, the downfall of Israel occurred through this split. The kings thought our solutions, our powers, the ones the kings came up with, these are the decisive solutions, the ones that will rout the enemy. These are the things that will work. Do the contents of Western thought, in fact, allow us to discern what is the will of God? My answer is, citing Romans 12:2, if they are accompanied with this testing, yes, they become part of the thinking that reveals it. But otherwise, no. We are always in danger of setting up what God does not want. Even if we are a holy man of the church, that is what we can do. Let me give you an example. Did Thomas Aquinas give us carefully wrought arguments from the tradition of Christian virtue ethics? Yes, he did. One of those arguments concerned the protection of minds from corruption, from suffering the greatest kind of harm possible, injurious to human souls. Is that an important good? Yes, it is. Did his argument draw on Christian thought? Yes. It cited St. Jerome. discussing the effect of the little leaven in Galatians 5:9. We must, Jerome said, cut off the decayed flesh, expel the mangy sheep from the fold, to save the whole body, the whole flock. What Aquinas recommended was that the perpetrators of that harm, heretics, be executed. Natural law, virtue ethics, tradition, God, the Bible, everything is in place here. But did these ideas prove themselves to express the will of God simply because they came from that source, our tradition? I say no. The ideas themselves need testing. The wisdom of the West, the application of Scripture itself, needs testing, exemplified in this image and the text it illustrates by Jesus. This testing is an issue emphasized by Paul. Knowing the will of God is a separate issue, and the substance of Western thought is not what allows us to discern it. When in 1 Thessalonians, Paul writes, test everything. What does Western civilization understand by this? The reflex explanation from the West will be, he's telling us to apply the cognitive standards that our great search for knowledge has proved to be so effective. Assess the evidence rationally. Be sure that beneath any claim you are considering, you have secure premises of true knowledge, that you are proceeding from the fundamental principles. But there is another understanding of the Apostle Paul's words. I suggest that it is the understanding of Paul himself. What he is advising when he talks about testing is to look in any plan of action that you are considering for the voice of God. Put your proposal, whatever it may be, carefully on the footing given to you by Jesus in the Gospels. Don't presume anything. Assure yourself that the words you are ready to obey have the sound of his voice. Christians have the truth only in the way the sheep have the shepherd, ever speaking to them and known by them. And Jesus explained this to us. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. A stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. This figure of speech Jesus used with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. I was inclined when reading this to think that I was one of those sheep, until I got to the line that says, a stranger they will not follow, but they will flee from him. Do you not realize that we do not flee from the stranger? The age that we are in, which Lewis called post-Christian in 1954, is steeped in presuppositions antithetical to our understanding of the world, and we have not seen this. We think it is a matter of nuance and say yes to the stranger, but we are in error. Modern freedom, for instance, Gertrude Himmelfarb wrote in 1974, that is 50 years ago, that John Stuart Mill's reconception of freedom, which says that the individual is sovereign, that his liberty is absolute, except where it might injure another, is a proposition hardly anyone would dispute. Christian students have told me they accept this. People like the sound of this view because it is tolerant, and people know deep down that tolerance is an expression of the golden rule. But here, we are being led by the stranger. Nothing has had a greater effect on the world than modern freedom, that doctrine. Do you accept it? It is actually absurd. It does not fit our understanding of something so basic as intelligible human actions. All actions are oriented to the good, not freedom. Freedom is not a good, but a condition of good. Freedom means being free to attain some good, but it is precisely good, some defensible purpose that we are aiming at, that modern freedom has talked us into cutting out of the way we now understand freedom. What has always been essential is the ability to test proposals, like the modern reformulation of freedom. This testing is not a matter of liking the sound of something, but of knowing the voice. Here is Jesus' charter for this kind of school, for the renewal of the mind. Jesus said, "The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice." This is how Jesus described those who are led out of the sheepfold. Out of what? By analogy. Out of the world, that is, the old life, the old culture, into the kingdom. When we have followed those whom Jesus called the stranger, we have been led deeper into the world. And we did so because we did not know the shepherd's voice. He leads them out. This is talk of leading. Is it talk of leadership? Is it telling us how to lead? It is telling us what to teach. I've just put two models of Christian education before us, the paternalistic one, which has in fact proved disastrous, and what I see as the Christian one. Truth, as what is true in a cognitive sense, is a redescription of truth around human procedures, evidence, reason, logic. These are essential, but they are subordinate to something else, something pointed out to his followers by Jesus. You are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Everything that I'm saying this morning is an attempt to correct this form of error. Truth is also, and more primarily, what came from the mouth of the truth, from Christ. The defining knowledge is not an education in the principles, insights, and conclusions of a knowledge-seeking Christian civilization. It does not consist of inherited truths or rational principles. It is relational knowledge, and it is experiential knowledge. The issue is not truth primarily, which will sound wrong to you. But the wrong element here is really the bias in our modernized understanding of truth. We have reconceived truth to fit a conception of education, when we should have done the reverse and fit education to the truth. The truth is the word of the future. It is the galvanizing hope. You knew this, but I'm telling you how, so it is clear. That the West has collapsed is a testimonial to the West's failure to appreciate this. Its drift into the replacement of truth with truths, of the divine with the human. If a Christian education is necessarily and also primarily an education in knowing the voice of the shepherd, the leader, There is something very significant about it that I want to bring into the open. In this, we will have a second central emphasis made by Christianity, and this will move us to my closing remarks. I now want to ask a question that is the turning point to what remains here. And this will take us back to William Blake and the Garden of Love. The great failing of followers of Christ is not to love while posing as followers of Christ. I've been talking to this point about fidelity. Now that issue is combined with love. Ambrogio Lorenzetti managed to combine them in his image of faith, faithfulness, fides. Love and fidelity are now my combined theme. But what is the connection? We're still talking about faithful following in the knowledge of the voice. But here's my question. Why are the sheep led out? Why do they follow? By which I mean, what does he do to make them follow? I have said what Jesus says. They are led out because they know his voice. The sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. They know it's him calling them, but why does it work that way? Why does his voice matter? I have reminded us that the great theme in both testaments of the Bible of the shepherd does not model leading, but being led. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. But now I want to bring out the other part of this. Why do the sheep follow? Let me read you something about biblical shepherds from William Barclay, once professor of divinity at Glasgow University in Scotland. In Palestine, the relationship between sheep and shepherd was much closer than in our country. Sheep in Palestine were rarely kept for killing, but for their wool. And therefore, a sheep was often in the flock for anything up to 8 or 9 years. The shepherd called the sheep by name and did not walk behind them as in this country, but in front. Each shepherd had a peculiar call, which his flock recognized. They would answer the call of their own shepherd and not of any other. H.V. Morton tells us he saw 2 flocks of sheep being put together into a communal fold in Bethlehem. He wondered how they would ever be sorted out when morning came, but it was very simple. The shepherds stood one on either side of the entry to the fold, and each gave his own peculiar cry, and each sheep ran to its own shepherd. Each sheep ran to its own shepherd. This is what Jesus has said. Jesus says that his sheep are led out, and they come out because there is a particular voice calling them. Why do they come? Why do they go to that voice? It must be because there's something about that shepherd, something they already know from their experience with him. The sheep follow the shepherd because of something. You might want to say that the sheep love the shepherd, but they're sheep. Don't they love the shepherd because of what he gives them? There are things that bind the sheep to the shepherd, and they have to do with the blessings of life. Makarioi, the original Greek translated blessed, as in blessed are the poor, means happy. It is happiness that makes the sheep followers. These are the real green pastures. These are the true still waters. The sheep know these blessings. And all I mean by blessings is the quality of this happiness. And in this happiness, they know their master. His voice is that voice that takes them into green pastures and leads them beside still waters. It is one of the most distinctive things that anyone in history ever said. And it is a thing that was not stated at all, but asked. that Jesus said to people, "What do you want me to do for you?" For you. It is one of the things that most reveals his kind of fatherhood, what kind of shepherd he is. That this has never become a great statement of the character of Christianity is a sign of the fact that Christianity in history became trapped in paternalism. Paternal dad doesn't care what you want. He knows what's good for you. The scarcity with which you have heard these words is an index of the character of civilization that Christian civilization took on, a character different from that of the great shepherd. The sheep follow the shepherd because of their experience, because of the past relationship of the shepherd to the sheep, the father to the child, their life together. The bond is in what the one has done for the other out of love. In the Gospels, it is the feeding of the sheep in particular that is mentioned. What is feeding? Sustaining their physical lives. But it is because the analogy uses sheep that this is physical. Feeding. Giving water. Healing. Physical things Jesus did in his work are all physical analogs, visible expressions of something deeper. The essential feeding is the feeding of the soul, providing something essential to us, to you, the inner you. The great theme of the shepherd and his sheep does not emphasize what paternalism emphasizes, obedience. But I feel quite sure that some, perhaps many of you, will be inclined to object. No, we say, the sheep follow obediently. Obedience is what following is all about. The sheep do follow obediently. But I've just been suggesting that obedience is not what following is all about. That this is a mistake we make, which moves us into paternalism and away from what is central, which is love. Just to make everything harder, however, we of course have a paternalist conception of love, tough love. I know what is good for you. This thing that you don't want to do, I'm making you do it because I love you. I'm not dismissing this. But again, I ask you whether this is imaged anywhere in Jesus' pictures of sheep and shepherd, in his paradigm of relation. He makes me lie down in green pastures. What is being said here? I would love to know more about the Hebrew. Isn't there a touch of irony here? Isn't it used to emphasize that this shepherd does not make the sheep do what they do not wish to do? There is a glorious convergence of what he wants and what they want. He makes them do it because they cannot resist. They cannot resist going into the green pastures. He forces them to do what they love. This is not paternalistic love. What I'm getting at by rejecting the claim that obedience is what following is all about is the character of the leader, which is evoked here in the words of the psalm. What does the shepherd who loves the sheep want for the sheep? He is not like Satan, offering things that serve his own ends, power at your cost. That is the fate that all the other alternative, non-Christlike voices call you to. For instance, the priests in black gowns binding with briars your joys and desires. That father is a father quite unlike the shepherd, and unlike the father in Jesus' parable of the prodigal son, too. Did that father bind the son's desires? Had he done so, he would have locked his son up in the house that he was desperate to escape, because Father knows best. Jesus cares more than the world does. the world cares not at all about the joys and desires of his sheep. And this means that he does not attempt to control the other flocks. This is the issue on which we can turn, finally, what I want to close with. Christians and the others.